Today we are going to talk about DMAIC, problem-solving process. This is the learning objectives. We'll cover most of them. And let's start from here. DMAIC stands for define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. Actually, this starts from Six Sigma. Six Sigma is the methodology or techniques. Start from late 80s, Motorola. They use a Six Sigma method for process improvement, aimed at a very high-end quality. In 1995, General Electronics have a renewed interest doing the Six Sigma, and that time actually they come out a more systematic and structured problem-solving techniques under the framework of Six Sigma. We call it DMAIC. And then after 2 years, 1997, Citibank, they actually learned from Motorola and General Electronics, and use these quality techniques, the problem-solving techniques, to their process, to their company. And after that, there are different kind of industry, especially start from the financial sectors, insurance, and then the other non-manufacturing service industry actually follow this kind of techniques and then use that in different extent. What I want to say is that the DMAIC techniques not just used for manufacturing, and it's not just limited to quality improvement. Actually, it's used for very wide range of industry, from manufacturing, different kind of manufacturing, and also non-manufacturing process. And the aim is for problem solving. And the keywords actually is a structured problem solving, or called systematic way to do problem solving. Now most people talk about innovation, and they think that doing innovation or problem solving should be out of the box. And usually there is nothing to follow. Every time it's different, but it's not always true. And here I will show you that for innovation, for problem solving, actually they do have a way to follow. So the structured problem solving techniques or systematic way to do problem solving actually is quite important. And then here the approach I'm going to teach you is the DMAIC approach. Here showing a little bit more detail, showing this 5 phase, and that's something we're going to cover. The define is how you define a problem scope, what's the objective, and then after you define the problem, you go to the measure phase. Measure phase is see how you quantify the thing, saying this problem, how you do you know is how good, how bad of the process is, what's the current situation, then you need to collect data and you do some measurement. After you measure, then you can do some analysis. So as analyze phase. Analyze phase, you try to find out what's the most important problem within this scope. And then analyze is not just use statistics, even though throughout this semester, throughout this program, we use some statistical techniques, but do analysis is not just do statistical analysis. There is some non-statistical way. We either use graphical way or use some management techniques to do the analysis, and we will cover that later. After analysis, after you analyze the situation, you possibly find out some root cause, and you can do improvement. Improvement is quite important, and then sometimes improvement is easy, and then you find out some root cause, you can just fix it. Sometimes it can be difficult. No matter how, they do have some systematic way to do that, and then that will be covered in the improve phase. And after improve, it's also quite important to do control, which means you need to have some mechanism to control the situation, make sure you sustain the improvement. Otherwise, because the human inertia, and then if you improve to a certain extent, and if you don't pay attention to that, they probably will go back to the beginning. So control also quite important. And you're probably saying that this DMAIC sounds like common sense. Everybody need to define a problem, collect data, analyze, make improvement, and then control that. However, most people, when you do problem solving, you don't follow that. Most people, especially in company, some people define a problem, they immediately want to go for analyze. Some people, without measure, they can directly do improvement. Sometimes people after measure, they directly do control. What I want to say is that people tend to skip the step. Even logically, they know they need to do that, but most of the time, they don't follow that step by step. So here, I'm going to show you some structured, systematic way to do problem solving. At the beginning, I don't want you to skip step. I want you to follow exactly DMAIC to make sure you can use some more quantitative approach to solve a problem. And that's quite important. Also, DMAIC is not just a concept. To solve a problem, actually you need a toolbox. And the tool, many of them is a statistical tool, and that's something we're going to follow and teach. So here is several tools we'll cover in later chapters. This also serves as an outline for this whole course. The way to arrange that in a textbook is follow the mathematical difficulty, which means from the mathematically start from the simple one, start from the statistical theory, and then later getting harder and harder in terms of mathematics. But when you do problem solving, sometimes you don't follow that sequence. So here for DMAIC, each one they have a very specific toolbox. Like a define, we'll use the method teach in chapter 2, and the major phase we'll use the method in some other chapters. And analyze, we'll use the chapter 4 and some other chapter, and improve, mainly use the design experiment in chapter 13. And the control, the main tool we call control chart, is covered from chapter 5 to chapter 9. Okay. So all of these, they have different kind of toolbox. So something I want to emphasize here, when you learn this, it's not just to learn this statistical method. It's not a purely mathematical or statistical course. But the key thing is you need to learn how to do problem solving. You need to know when to use what tools. So it's quite important. So to the end, of course, you need to learn how to calculate by hand. But computer software can do that, most of calculation for you. And then something you have to know by yourself is when to use what tool. So when you go to do problem solving, doing DMAIC, you know when you face a situation, for example, right now in the analyze phase, you know that what kind of tool you can use, and you can go to that chapter. The same for improve and control. To learn and to practice this, one thing important is to have a project. Something you really cannot learn purely from textbook. So this course also, we have a term project. And then for company or industry, likewise, they are not learn something academic, but they need to learn this for problem solving. The one thing to practice or implement is through the project. So for project, actually it's an essential part. It's an essential part of DMAIC. So DMAIC, you're going to practice through a project. And the breakthrough opportunity means that we're doing project mainly for process improvement. Find out there's some opportunity for breakthrough. And also to emphasize some financial system integration, which means that the project is not just, even though you're doing for problem solving and quality improvement, you need to somewhat link with financial system, which means you need to, each project, you need to also show the cost saving. And that's actually quite important for a company. They want to justify the project successful or not. And the one key index is the dollar sign, how much money you save. So you somewhat need to link with finance. Also, the value opportunity for a project must be clear. You need to pick up the project with a high impact, especially those with high financial impact will be quite important to a company. And project selection will be the key. And it needs require some experience, and we will discuss more in throughout this course. And then you need to pick up a right project to start with. Sometimes you're saying, of course, there are many type of failure mode for project implementation. It's a one major failure mode for project. Actually, it's a project selection, which means that at the very beginning you choose the wrong project, and then even you don't go through that, or I know that very likely you're going to fail. So actually, you choose the right project to work on, some suitable project to go to DMAIC, and sometimes it's quite important. Some projects simply is too small, it don't have enough impact, it just wastes your time. Sometimes project probably too large, too complicated, you cannot finish that in time. So there are many considerations that you need to do in order to get the success of a project. So project selection is actually quite important, and also project management is important too. Some of that we're going to discuss in class. And then here just some illustration showing that we need to actually pick up high impact project. And then here's the illustration, simple illustration saying that to pick up the project with and without high impact, actually it ends up the result is quite different. Okay. You can go through that, I will not get into detail. The following page is going to show you a little bit more detail about the DMAIC. For define phase, for define step, when you start a project, you start from define. And then this page is showing the thing we call the project charter. Project charter actually is quite simple. It's a summary of a project at the very beginning, including what's the business case, what's the goal, what's your project plan, including the timetable, opportunity, which means that there's a possible improvement, and then what's your scope. Make sure it's not too big, not too small, and who is your team member. These are simple, brief information, but it's very important. At the very beginning, you put in one page called project charter. Some people saying project charter is like a passport for a project. You need to get the approval from your top management saying that we're going to do this. Make sure there's some common agreement. And this is very simple, but it's quite important. Some people don't do this and directly start a project. Usually in the middle of the time, they realize that, okay, they have different understanding about the goal, different understanding about the scope, and different understanding even who should be in the team, should be outside the team. They don't have common agreement. I will get into a mess. So we have a project charter, actually it's quite important. And sometimes they have different form, but quite similar. You can find it out. Another tool also quite important in the define phase to have better understanding of process. You can use this called the SIPOC. SIPOC, S-I-P-O-C, is the 5 English words. It's the supplier, input, process, output, and customer. It's a 5 English word we call the SIPOC. Process is the process you want to work on, but before you get into detail, you need to know the process usually have input, and input is provided by the party you call supplier. Supplier provide input to the process. Supplier can be internal supplier, can be external supplier. External supplier means the real supplier who sent you raw material. And sometimes within a company, your upstream department or party to give you input, they call it supplier. And the input can be a real material, but they also can be information, can be data, and those provide with input. The input can be something tangible or intangible. And process usually have output. They produce something. It can be a real product, but also can also be information or document. And the output should be received by some people, some party, and then received by the customer. Again, the customer is a general term that can be external customer, which means that the real customer receive or buy your product, and can be internal customer, which means there's just downstream department or downstream party within a company that receive the thing you produce. Why I'm talking about this? Because SIPOC is quite important to understanding at the very beginning of your project. Understand the process, what's the input, what's the output, who provide the input, who received the output, and also the process. The process you should have the simple process flow to have more detailed understanding what's the process about. And then you can understand its scope and the information about the process in order to go to the next step. So in define phase, even though you don't have the data to do really doing statistical analysis, but you should have understanding. So project charter and the SIPOC diagram is quite important as a first step. And then usually before we leave the step, in this case it's a defined step, we usually have a thing called a toll gate. Toll gate is like you're driving a highway. Sometimes if you want to leave the highway, you need to pay. You need to do some checking. It's like a checking gate, toll gate. Before you leave the define phase, you need to check several points. And here just a summary. For example, it's a problem statement focused on simpleton, not the cause and solution. And the define phase need to define a problem, not define a solution. Sometimes people directly put down a solution there, which is wrong. All key stakeholder identified, which means that all people involved should be somewhat considered in this phase. What's the evidence to confirm the value opportunity? So you're saying that it's a high impact project. How do you know that is? You should have some evidence. And also the verify the scope is quite important. It cannot be too small. Cannot be too broad. Cannot be too broad. And the CPOC diagram have been completed or not is also quite important. And also any obvious barrier you need to identify beforehand. And then sometimes you need to consider that beforehand before you really implement, not that stuck in the middle. Also the team action plan for the major phase. So what's your plan for next step? So that's the end of defining step, and we'll prepare to move to the next steps.